Okay, we're waiting a few more seconds. Okay, and we can start. Good evening, my name is Noam and I'm from Moreshet. I am pleased to welcome you to the second event of the second series of webinars, Polish Talk Mondays with JHI. This special program is a cooperation between Moreshet, Mordechai Anielewicz Memorial Education and Research Center, the Polish Institute in Tel Aviv, the Association of Israeli Guides and Leaders of Delegations to Poland and Commemoration of the Holocaust, and the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute. This evening, we are hosting Dr. Agnieszka Witkowska-Krych.
Hello, good evening.
Who will speak about the subject In Whom We Trust, the case of Korczak last March. We'll have approximately 45 minutes of presentation and then approximately 15 minutes for questions. When we get to the question session, please submit your questions via the Q&A button on your screen and not via the chat. Dr. Agnieszka Witkowska-Krych is a cultural anthropologist, Hebraist, and sociologist. She graduated from the University of Warsaw with a degree in inter-faculty individual studies in the humanities, gained another degree from the Collegium Civitas at Warsaw. Her PhD is devoted to the fate of orphaned children in the Warsaw Ghetto. For many years, Witkowska-Krych has worked at the Research Center of the Museum of Warsaw. She is currently employed in the Institute of Polish Culture at the University of Warsaw and in the Jewish Historical Institute. She has published a number of academic and educational articles on the history and culture of the Polish Jews, and she is the author of the book Mniej strachu, ostatnie chwile ze Januszem Korczakiem, Less Fear, the Last Moments of Janusz Korczak, awarded with the Clio Prize for the best historical books. So Dr. Witkowska, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, both for this nice introduction, but first and foremost for the invitation to speak today. I feel happy and privileged to have the chance to share with you a part of the research that I conducted in order to understand why and how Korczak became this symbolic figure of the Holocaust, both for the Poles and for the Jews. And what is the image of Korczak? What do we know about him? And what are we eager to accept? Why the legend is so tempting to be so widely accepted? Let me share my presentation, and that's gonna take a second. Hopefully I will manage. Yes. It looks fine, I guess, but please confirm if it looks really fine. Okay, so I entitled my today's lecture like not easily, because whom we trust refers to the people who are telling us the story about Janusz Korczak, but this thing in brackets, in whom we trust, refers to Korczak himself. What image of Korczak we are eager to accept, and as I mentioned already, why we are very much eager to accept this legendary vision of his heroism, his behavior, and so on and so forth. Just to remind you about whom we are going to speak today, it's only a few short facts. Let me just recollect that Janusz Korczak was not Janusz Korczak from the very, very beginning. He was born as Henryk Goldschmidt in Warsaw in the 22nd of July, 1878 or 9. We don't know the exact date of his birthday. He was a writer, he was a medical doctor, he was a pedagogue. He was also the director of the orphanage for Jewish orphans. This orphanage was located at Krochmalna Street. Now this street does not exist. I mean, it does exist, but not in the same place. The address does not exist, actually. So if you are in Warsaw, don't look for Krochmalna 92. Go to Jaktorowska 6. I'm sorry, there's a typo, but Jaktorowska 6 is today's address of the orphanage of the Janusz Korczak, and the building is still there. So for those who are willing to visit the place, you are always invited. Korczak is widely known for his books, both for the children and for the adults. for the Gazette that he established. The Gazette was called the Little Review, and also for the innovative pedagogical methods, and actually for the last moments of his life. So I have mentioned that I have mentioned that he conducted the orphanage, but he was not the only one who was the leader of this institution. And I have to mention another person, and this person was Stefania Wilczyńska. She was his closest co-worker, working partner, not his help or assistant. They were equals. So please remember that while speaking about Korczak and his pedagogical legacy, we have to also remember about his closest co-worker, Stefania Wilczyńska, who actually visited Palestine 4 times and is, as far as I know, she's also widely known in Israel nowadays. The orphanage was dedicated to the Jewish children and only Jewish children. And as the children were Jewish and the staff was also mostly Jewish, they were also forced, as all of the Jews of Warsaw, they were also forced to move to the newly created ghetto. And you've got the map here. That's the map, like symbolic map of the Warsaw Ghetto. So as the orphanage was located outside of the borders of the designed Jewish residential area, they had to change the location, and we are going to speak about the changes a little bit further. But have a look on the map, and let me just remind you that the Warsaw Ghetto was created on the 16th of November 1940, and it was not extremely big. It only, the area of the Warsaw Ghetto was a little bit more than 3 square kilometers, and more than 460,000 people, 60,000 Jews were imprisoned there. And it existed actually till the 16th of May, 1943. That was the last day of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, but probably the most significant date of the existence of the Warsaw Ghetto, the most significant period of the existence of the Warsaw Ghetto was the period of the Great Liquidation Action that took place in the summer 1942. By the way, the first day of the Great Liquidation Action was the birthday of Korczak. So I've already mentioned the changes that happened that affected the orphanage conducted by Janusz Korczak. On the first picture from the left, you can see the original building of the orphanage that was located in Krochmalna 92. Then after, when the ghetto was created, they had to move to another building, to the building of a school of trade for boys, not very convenient actually, because it was a school, not a residential institution for the orphans, but they managed to adapt the place somehow. And in 1942, when the borders of the ghetto were shrinking, and the area of the Warsaw Ghetto was shrinking, they had to move once more to the last location, to the building of Association of Trade and Industry Workers, located at Sienna 16, Śliska 9. We've got this double address because some of the buildings located between Sienna Street and Śliska Street, they have those double addresses. Like, for example, the hospital for the children, the Bersons and Baumann's Hospital, it also has this double address. So you can see how the premises looked like. And as I mentioned already, the second location was the School of Trade for Boys. And we can also see some of the boys waiting for the classes in front of the building. But the last building, the last location was completely irrelevant. That was the building with offices. That was the building where it was rather very difficult to put at that moment nearly 200 children, locate them rationally, and also adapt this building to be a proper orphanage. Moreover, in this building, there were other institutions located, like By institutions, I also mean the cafe of cafe that was called Cafe Sienna, that was located in the ground floor, and also some of the other institutions like soup kitchen that was put somewhere in the middle of the building. So it was not an integral area for the children. They had to share it with many more people. And have a look on the map. So we've got Krochmalna, we've got the initial place of the orphanage, we've got the second address here in Chłodna 33, and you've got the third one located more or less here. Nowadays, there is Palace of Culture and Science. So for those who visited Warsaw or who live in Warsaw, you will easily recognize this place, and you will also have the chance to see one of the monuments of Janusz Korczak that was erected there not many years ago. So there is a monument that depicts kind of a tree, Korczak, and a group of children. And I have to mention that Korczak is alone, like he was the only leader of the institution. And you remember that I already mentioned that I wanted to underline the fact that he was not the only one. The staff of this institution was not very big, because many of the duties were also held by the children. But at the same time, we have to remember that Korczak was not the only one who was leading the whole institution. That was also Stefania Wilczyńska and a group of people who were experiencing the same fate, and who experienced, most of them, the same grand finale, so to say. So let's speak about the great liquidation action. That's the moment that made Korczak remembered. That's the moment that made the whole story so important, both for the Polish and Jewish and worldwide memory, international memory. We will be speaking about the great liquidation action, as that was the moment that actually ended up the history of the orphanage of Janusz Korczak. That was the moment when most of the institution of social help, social support got deported to the death camp in Treblinka. Those were not only the orphanages, those were also the houses for elderly people, those were also the houses for the people who were relocated to Warsaw from other places, like the refugees or resettlers. That was the moment when most of the people who were considered, according to the German law and according to the German narration, that was the moment when most of the people who were considered to be, and sorry for this word, but I'm quoting the documents, the people who were unproductive. So most of the so-called unproductive people were deported to the east, as it was claimed, to work. But of course, we all know that that was not work, that was death. And the Great Liquidation Action, also called Grossaktion from German, it took place in the summer of 1942. And most of the people who were heading to the east never came back. And among them, there were a lot of institutions of social help, not only the orphanages, not only the orphanage of Korczak, but, and Noam also mentioned that, but I was also dealing with the history of the other orphanages of the Warsaw Ghetto, and the number of them exceeded 20. Most of those orphanages were also deported, sent to the east, to Treblinka gas chambers. So Korczak is one of them. Korczak's institution is one of them, but the number of them exceeded 20. Yes. So what happened, and what do we know, and in whom we trust? Whom we trust and in whom we trust, actually. So let's speak firstly about the date of the deportation, which for many years, I would say, was unknown, because there were different dates that were proposed by those who were claiming that they were witnesses of the last march of the group from the orphanage of Janusz Korczak. We know that everything happened at the beginning of August, but there are at least 4 dates that appear in the recollections of the testifiers. We've got the 5th of August, 6th of August, 7th of August, and the 12th of August. And here we can already see that 5th of August and 12th of August is Wednesday. So it can be, I mean, we can derive the first preliminary conclusion that it could have happened on Wednesday, because very often we don't remember the exact date. We remember that that was the beginning of the week or something around Shabbat. Wednesday was not the Shabbat, not before the Shabbat, not the next day after the Shabbat, but maybe someone just remembered that it was Wednesday at the beginning of August. So this 5th of August and 12th of August are somehow correlated. 6th of August, well, there is some, I mean, while reading the testimonies, we mostly read about the march. But in some testimonies, it's also written that the deportation, and I mean here the moment when the children were sent from Umschlagplatz to Treblinka, it could have happened a day later. So this 6th of August can be also accepted, but not at the moment of the last march, but at the moment as the moment of the sending, the actual sending the children to the east. But while speaking about the march that actually stayed in the memory of most of the people, and is the symbol of Korczak's heroism, devotion, and loyalty, we can also use another type of data, and I decided to use this type of data while correlating those testimonies and recollections. I decided to check the weather. What was the weather on the 5th of August, 1942 and on the 6th of August, 1942? And apparently the 5th of August was sunny and beautiful, and the 6th of August was gloomy and rainy and not very nice. In most of the testimonies, we read about a very hot, sunny day, difficult to survive and difficult for the children to march those many kilometers in the streets of the ghetto. There is another thing, and another thing is the Korczak's diary. Here on the picture, you have the first page of the diary that survived. So Korczak started writing his diary in May 1942, and he was writing it not every day, almost every day, but actually almost every night. He was not writing during the day, he was rather writing during the night while sitting next to the children, sleeping in his bedroom, in his room. And he was writing by hand. The diary was handwritten, and only a little bit later, it was typewritten by his colleague, the colleague like younger co-worker. He was called Henryk Anielewicz. So Korczak was writing during the night, and the next day or a few days later, Henryk Anielewicz was typing the whole thing, and that's why we've got only this typed version. The diary survived. It was removed from the building on Sienna 16, Śliska 9, almost right after the deportation. And the last record is written under the date 4th of August. So we can assume that the last record that Korczak was making was written between the 3rd and the 4th of August. And then on the 4th of August, it was typewritten by Henryk Anielewicz and somehow prepared to be rescued, sent somewhere, and so on and so forth. So we don't have the next note. It's possible that it existed. It's possible that Korczak was also writing between the 4th and the 5th, but Henryk Anielewicz never had the chance to type it. So the diary is also some kind of a hint when everything started and when everything ended. So we can derive some preliminary conclusions from those data, from those recollections, from the diary. 5th of August seems to be most likely for the date of the deportation, for the date of the last march of Korczak. Maybe not the deportation, not the sending, the actual sending from Umschlagplatz to Treblinka, but for the march on the streets of the Warsaw Ghetto. And as I've already mentioned before, the name of the day of the week, the weather, and also the fact that most of the roundups conducted in the so-called small ghetto, so the southern part of the Warsaw Ghetto, they took place on the 5th of August. There's another thing. This gentleman, that there is a blue arrow, you can see this arrow and you can see this gentleman. This is Michał Wróblewski, also known as Misha Wasserman. He was a very close co-worker of Janusz Korczak. He was also with him in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was staying most of the time in the building of the orphanage, the one on Sienna. And he was also forced to work for the Germans with a few elder boys from the orphanage outside of the ghetto. On the 5th of August, he was not present in the building. He was with these 3 guys working somewhere outside of the ghetto. And when he came back on this 5th of August, 1942, he realized that the building is empty. Moreover, his wife, Zofia Wróblewska, they were not married at the time, they were dating. So his wife, Zofia Wróblewska, says and was claiming for many years that the whole thing happened on her birthday. And her birthday is on the 5th of August. And usually you remember the date of your birthday. So there are some, I mean, we cannot be certain, like 100% sure. So we cannot be sure, but I would rather say that the actual march took place on the 5th of August. And let me speak about the duration. And a few days ago, I extracted this map from Google Maps and I checked how many minutes I would need by marching, I mean, to reach Umschlagplatz when I start in front of the Palace of Culture and Science. So it's about 40 minutes. Of course, it depends on the weather and so on and so forth, but anyway, it's 40 minutes. For them, it was much longer. 2 points are certain, like 100% sure. So it's the beginning and the end. So the beginning is, nowadays, it's Teatr Lalka, Palace of Culture and Science. And the last point, the destination, is the Umschlagplatz. The address is Stawki 5. And as I've mentioned already, it could be covered within 1 hour. But how it looked like earlier. So the starting point is the same, Sienna 16, Śliska 9. The ending point, the last point is Umschlagplatz with the address. And the point that is certain, like again, 100% is the bridge over Chłodna Street. That was the only way to move, to reach, that was the only way from the small ghetto that was located here in the southern part of the whole ghetto to the big ghetto here. That was the only way to get from here to there. So those 3 points are again sure. What else can we tell? We can also ask another question about the preparation of the children for this trip to the east. So theoretically, they were prepared. In the 30s, Korczak wrote an article that was entitled The Walk. And in this article, he was trying to explain to other teachers and educators how to make children prepared for a trip, for a walk in the city, how to make them behave properly in order not to attract too much attention, and so on and so forth. So Korczak knew how to behave, how to put the children in order, how to make them occupied somehow, and how to make them feel also safe and sound. So we are not going to read this passus, we are not going to read this quotation, but let me just tell you that, I mean, theoretically, they know how to do, how to act, how to behave in the city, on the streets, in the crowd. But they also had some kind of experience, like practical experience, because they moved to the ghetto. And here there is a quotation by Hanna Mordkowicz-Olczakowa, who was very close with Korczak, who was the daughter of Korczak's publisher, who was contacting Korczak very often, also in the ghetto. And she said, she wrote actually after the war, that Korczak designed the whole transfer in a very funny way. The transfer to the ghetto from Krochmalna 92 to Chłodna 33, he designed it in a very funny way in order to make the children feel safe, not somehow, I mean, to make it rather a funny event than a tragic experience. And she wrote that he designed the transfer as a great opera buffo, a grotesque parade through the city in which a procession of children would carry to the new place lamps, cages with birds and potties. And they were singing, and we know that they were singing the song. It's a sail song, the song that is sung by the sailors. Actually, the music was written by Schubert. Choć burza huczy wkoło nas, that's the Polish title. So maybe this event also affected the memory of the last march of Korczak and the orphans. So maybe some people who were witnessing the transfer to the ghetto somehow correlated those two events, and then after they were claiming that it looked more or less the same. How the course of events looked like. So we don't know, that's the first conclusion, but there was a man called Marek Rudnicki who claimed that he was accompanying the group from the very beginning till the very end. And his recollection is rather, it's not very pathetic. He's rather trying to convey that Korczak was rather exhausted, children were exhausted, the way was very long, and it took many hours. So as we already discussed, how long it could have taken, today it's 40 minutes, but at that time it could have been like 3-4 hours with the stops. And here you've got the picture of photo of the church that was, there were 3 churches located within the borders of the Warsaw Ghetto. That's the Church of All Saints. And there is also the place of All Saints, so to say, Grzybowski place in front of the church. And that was probably the first stop or kind of a gathering for the people who were designated to be sent to Treblinka on that day. So Marek Rudnicki could have been there also, but for sure there was also Luba Blum-Bielicka, the head mistress of the School of Nurses that was operating within the borders of the Warsaw Ghetto. And she was also claiming that she saw Korczak. She also wrote that they were talking, and Korczak assured her that the children are prepared and they will get a separate wagon, separate carriage, in order to be sent to the east in quite comfortable conditions. So she survived the war, and actually she could have told us more, but she never told us more details. But she's the one that can be trusted, actually, because she was not making Korczak like a big hero, like a big figure. She was rather trying to enumerate the facts, which is always very helpful. So from Grzybowski Square, they had to move, they had to walk to the bridge over Chłodna Street. And here we have like two testimonies, one a little bit more reliable and the second one a little bit less reliable. The first one is the testimony of Adina Blady-Schweiger, who was not living here or working here. He was working in the cross section of Żelazna Street, and Żelazna Street, that's the street Żelazna, and Leszno, that's located not here, not very far away from the bridge, but not in this exact place. And she was working in that children's hospital as a pediatrician. And at the moment of deportation, at the moment of the march, she was standing next to the window, and she claimed after the war that she saw the march, the parade of Korczak and the children. You can have the exact quotation from the book written by her. There's another testimony of Irena Sendler, whom you know probably very well, but I have to admit and I have to confess that I've got a problem with this testimony, because at the moment, within the period of the Great Liquidation Action, it's hardly possible that Irena Sendler was able to enter the Warsaw Ghetto. But at the same time, she was claiming after the war that yes, she was there and she was observing the parade. And I had the privilege, it was many, many years ago, I had the privilege to talk to Irena Sendler, and she was telling me that yes, she saw the group, she saw Korczak, and Korczak was holding two children on his arms, and they were walking and they were singing and they looked neatly and so on and so forth. So you can decide in your heart whether to believe or not, but we've got many of such testimonies where people are telling things that were completely impossible, but at the same time they just wanted to be a part of this history. They wanted to be the witness. They wanted to have the chance to speak about this very important Warsaw Ghetto event. So we've got more points, so to say. We've got the beginning, we've got the bridge, we've got also the end. We've got also another points. Here is Bluma-Blum-Bieliska, already mentioned. Here is Adina Blady-Schweiger. Here's the bridge, here's Adina Blady-Schweiger. This is the Umschlagplatz. And there is another story of Władka Mid, Feigl-Międzyrzecki, she was using both names, that was claiming after the war, she survived, that she was sitting in the bunker, and from the bunker, somehow, she also had the occasion, she also had the chance to see the children. There is another testimony that probably you all know, the testimony of, actually that's the book written by Mary Berg, who was also saying that she was observing Korczak from here, from the Pawiak prison. That's the place of the Pawiak prison, and she wrote that she saw a group of children, as very small children, that were conducted to the Umschlagplatz. So it's possible that she saw something. It's very possible. She probably saw the group of children from the orphanage located here in Dzielna 39. That was the orphanage for the youngest kids, for the youngest children, also the newborn children, the foundlings. So those children from Dzielna 39, they were moved during the action, but a little bit later than at the beginning of August. They were moved to another orphanage that was located in Dzielna 67. And probably only from there, they were moved somehow or forced to walk to the Umschlagplatz. But that's another story. And the recollection of Mary Berg, who was sitting here in the Pawiak prison. Actually, she was an American citizen. That's why she was somehow saved from the deportation. So this is not very reliable. She saw something, And she decided to say that that's Korczak's story, but that was not definitely Korczak's story. And we've got two other people, Jerzy Lewiński, who was a Jewish policeman, and Nahum Rembach was employed in the Jewish Council, in the so-called Judenrat. And Nahum Rembach was working in the Umschlagplatz, and Jerzy Lewiński was also there. And their testimonies are very similar to the testimony of Marek Rudnicki, who was saying that Korczak was not holding all of the children on his arms. He was not singing. They were not jumping. They were not happy. They claim, Lewiński, Remba, and also Marek Rudnicki, they claim that they were all rather depressed and they were rather not very optimistic about the fact about what is going to happen in a moment. So when they were having the Umschlagplatz, they were not sent to the gas chambers at once. They had to spend some time there. And this is the moment that I already mentioned, that probably it's very probable that they got deported the next day. It's possible that they spent a night in one of the buildings that were surrounding Umschlagplatz, and they had to wait a few hours or a little bit more to be sent, to be packed into the wagons, and then only to be sent. And that's the moment of another legend, the legend of a good German, so to say, good German soldier who is proposing Korczak a rescue. And Korczak is, of course, refusing, shouting and saying to him, "Go away, you dog," or something like this. This motive is used in a movie of Alexander Ford that was screened in the 50s or 60s. That was the German movie, entitled in German, "Sie sind frei, Dr. Korczak." This motive of a good German who is proposing him and only him, not his staff, not the children, him and only him, some kind of a rescue. So yes, so Nahum Remba, who was present on the Umschlagplatz, who was, as I already mentioned, the worker of Judenrat in Warsaw, was also trying to propose Korczak some kind of a rescue. And this is probable, this is possible, that a Jewish worker, a Jewish official is trying to help a Jewish ghetto prisoner. That's possible. But as Remba wrote, actually, he refused. He didn't want to leave the children even for a minute. And Jerzy Lewiński is also telling something about this German soldier, this imaginary German soldier who is proposing a rescue to Korczak. No German officer in the Umschlagplatz ever freed a Jew. He would not even make an offer like that. And that's probably the thing that really happened, that actually no German soldier, no German citizen was actually interested in rescuing Korczak, his children or his co-workers. So what can we derive from the data? First of all, we can try to depict somehow the route. On the left side, you've got all of the versions that could have been possible. And the blue dots are uncertain sections. I tried, using some kind of a logic and also the topography of Warsaw, I tried to make it rather a little bit clear. And I would propose the way here on Grzybowska, then after Żelazna, and here it's rather certain. And here, as most of the people were marching via Zamenhofa Street, I would rather say that they went this way. They were not coming closer to Pawiak, to Dzielna, where Mary Berg was observing someone, but they went this way. Of course, it's not certain, and we cannot say that it happened this way, but basing on the testimonies, basing on the recollections, basing on the logic, we can try to assume somehow that it looked like this. And then, so let's come to the conclusions slowly but surely, because the time is running, as always. So the date we already discussed. It could have been, it was the beginning of August. The most probable day was the 5th of August. And that was the moment of the last march of the orphanage Korczak and his co-workers. They could have been sent to Treblinka already that day, but it's also possible that they stayed a night in one of the buildings surrounding Umschlagplatz, and they were sent the next day. The German documents say, I mean, of course, there are no lists of the deportees, but there are some numbers. And on the 5th of August, more than 6,000 people were sent, and the next day, the number increased to 10,000 people. So maybe they were waiting and they were sent in the bigger group. About the duration of the march, it's not 40 minutes for sure. It could have been 3-4 hours. They were stopping, they were waiting for other groups to be joined. So I would say that it could have been about 4 hours. If they started walking in the morning, and we know that it was after the breakfast, so if they started to walk around 9, so it's possible that they were walking in the sun, in the noon. I mean, in the middle of the day, in the full sun, and maybe they reached Umschlagplatz around 1 p.m. or 2 p.m., something like this. The route we already discussed, but actually I would like to focus now on the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is the thing that is very often discussed in the testimonies and is very often used as a background of the Korczak's legend. So as I already mentioned, Marek Rudnicki, whom I trust, was saying that they were rather sad, they were rather apathetic and extremely exhausted. There are, of course, some people who were claiming that they were singing, they were waving the flags, and they were rather walking for a school trip, for the vacation or somewhere else. It's rather impossible. They did have a flag, because in the orphanage they earlier, and we read it in the notes of Janusz Korczak, that they had some kind of a big flag that was a symbol of the orphanage. So it's possible that they took this thing with them just to make them more courageous, maybe. But it's rather impossible that every child had a flag and was waving it. It's possible that they were singing, maybe at the beginning. But after a few hours of walking, waiting, and not knowing what is going to happen, I would rather say that it's rather impossible. So the whole image, the whole picture of the last march of Janusz Korczak, as you can already realize, it's very complicated, and I would say we will never, I mean, end up with a complex idea how it truly looked like. But there were some attempts to make it, and here I can show you the poster of the famous movie that was made in 1990 in Poland by Janusz Wajda, that actually shaped the memory about Korczak, about the last moments of the orphanage, about the last march also. And I guess, and I would expect or suspect that most of the people in Poland, they associate Korczak with this movie, with those pictures, with those scenes, when they are truly singing, when they are truly, when Korczak is holding children on his arms, he is trying to persuade them that they are going for a trip. They are not going to be killed. They are going to a trip, and they are going to meet somewhere else, maybe. I don't remember if you, I don't know if you remember the last scenes from this movie, and I'm not going to spoil the end, but I would strongly recommend you watching this thing, and the last scenes when the story is actually not told till the end, so you can imagine what could have happened to them. I guess that I used all my time and now I exhausted you fully. So let me just open the floor for the questions, and thank you very much for your attention. And I hope that some of those facts and some of those remarks will be useful for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now let's look what are the questions you got. To our audience, I'll just say if you'd like to add questions, please use the Q&A. And if you'd like to write your questions in Hebrew or Polish, it's possible. We will do our best to translate it into English. I would like to steal the first question. You spoke about the willing of being part of history, so people tell what they saw or what they think they see. And what do you think methodologically maybe we can or we should conclude from this test case regarding, I mean, in a more wide or general perspective, regarding how people remember or telling history?
So in my opinion, I mean, Korczak is remembered as a loyal, very devoted, very brave, also extremely healthy person who is leading his children. The number exceeded at that time probably 200. He's leading his children to death. At the same time, we know that he was neither very optimistic nor very healthy. I would say that this march was very exhausting also for him. He had some health problems. He had some problems with his lungs. He had some problems with some kind of like men's things that very often affect elder men at the age of 60 with some, you know, intimate organs. And he's writing about it in his diary, and that he was rather depressed, like mentally also. And we can read it in the testimony of Marek Rudnicki that he was not brave at that time. I mean, he was brave, but he was not acting as a very brave. He was not showing off. He was murmuring the questions, why it happened to us, why we need to go to the East, and so on and so forth. So he was rather resigned at that moment. But we all needed a hero. I mean, especially after the war, we, the Poles, needed the hero, and I guess that also the Jewish community needed a hero, this kind of a hero who was loyal, which is true, who was brave, who was strong, who was reliable for the children. So I guess that was the social need, kind of a social need. The community needed such a person. Community needed the continuation of Korczak's experiences, also pre-war experiences, that he was very devoted, he was very active in many fields. He was a writer, he was a doctor, he was a kind of a community leader, he was an editor of the Children's Gazette, he was speaking in the Polish radio, he was writing to different gazettes, and so on and so forth. So I would say it was a natural continuation of this pre-war image. And I was once thinking, what could have happened if the war could never started and never ended? We would remember Korczak as well. I mean, we would not remember the other teachers. We would not remember the other educators. We would remember Korczak because he had this background, he had this experience, he was very well known. And he was a public figure, so to say. He was not only the teacher, only the educator, only the director of one of the orphanages operating in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was a public figure. He was a celebrity, I would say. So, and he was a very good material, very good person to be remembered also after the war, after the Holocaust. I mean, having such a person, having such a legend, having such a hero was useful for everyone. Okay, and I've got the questions. And I've got the questions, so let me read them. Read them. Is the house on Sienna the same of the Children Bauman and Berson Hospital? No. Those are completely different buildings. The house of the hospital, was erected in 1878. Part of it, actually, because now it's bigger. And that was designed and built precisely for the children to be a hospital. They had some problems in operation. It was closed for a moment. Then after reopened in 1930, the head of this institution was Dr. Anna Braude-Heller. They knew each other, by the way, Korczak and Braude-Hellerowa. But that was not the same building. Was it clear? Oh, okay, Schweiger. But Schweiger was at that hospital. Adina Blady-Schweiger was in the hospital, but in the branch of the hospital, because in 1941, the Children's Hospital from Sienna Śliska, the initial building, so to say, they decided that they are going to open a branch, and the branch was opened in the building of a school at the cross section of Żelazna and Leszno. By the way, this building still exists. So if you are in Warsaw and if you want to see the building of the branch of the Hospital of Bersons and Baumans, it's still there. And Adina Blady-Schweiger was working there in this branch, not in the main place. Was it clear to all involved the expected fate for the children, or the rescue proposal was not about life and death, but of another nature? That's a very good question. Of another nature. What kind of another nature, actually? What else could have been proposed to Korczak? I've already mentioned that Luba Blum-Bielicka, the headmistress of the school for nurses, she was also led and forced to go to the Umschlagplatz with her students, and they were rescued from the Umschlagplatz because they were considered to be useful, somehow productive as nurses, as medical staff. There's another story of another orphanage, of the orphanage that was located on the street Twarda 27, that was directed by Maria Rotblat, the mother of Lutek Rotblat, whom you know from the story of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And Maria Rotblat, with her institution, with the institution that was actually designed for older girls, they were proposed to leave Umschlagplatz, and they left Umschlagplatz, but only because of the fact that the girls were employed as workers in some of the manufacturers operating in the Warsaw Ghetto. So that could have been some kind of a proposal, but the children of Korczak were too young to be proposed to work. I mean, most of them, 3 of them were working outside. I've mentioned this fact, but most of the children were rather too young to be employed as physical workers anyway. Okay, so I'm reading the questions. From the Swedish Korczak Association, there is a historian that argues that Korczak never made to Auschwitz, that was Treblinka actually, not Auschwitz, but died from dysentery on the train. If this was not already addressed in the lecture, what do you know about this? I don't know if it was dysentery or anything else. He was already very exhausted, tired, malnutrition, depressed, and so on and so forth. It's possible, and I agree with that in the train, I mean, the distance from Warsaw to Treblinka is about 100 kilometers, a little bit more. So it can be covered nowadays within 1 hour, but of course it took ages to reach Treblinka. So it's possible that in this crowd and in such very poor conditions, some of the people, and we know that some of the people died already in the carriages. It's possible that Korczak was one of them. I don't know if it was dysentery. I would not say so. He's not mentioning that while speaking about his health state. I would rather say it was rather like, I don't know, maybe a stroke or kind of another, you know, yes, that he just died from exhaust. Where was Korczak's diary found? It was found outside of the Warsaw Ghetto because it was moved from the ghetto to the so-called Aryan side. I hate this expression, Aryan side, but I use it because it's somehow useful. So it was moved outside of the Warsaw Ghetto by, we don't know for sure who did it, but probably those children, those old children, those youngsters who came to the orphanage with Misha Wróblewski, with Michał Wasserman, they packed the whole thing and they sent it outside of the ghetto. The package, that was not only the diary, that was also a bunch of another texts of Korczak. They ended up in the private home of Igor Neverly, and Igor Neverly was a Polish secretary of Janusz Korczak. He also acted as the editor of Mały Przegląd, of the little review gazette that I mentioned. He somehow inherited this function from Korczak. They were very close friends. Igor Neverly was moreover married to Barbara Scheinbaum, and Barbara Scheinbaum was one of the children of Korczak, one of the first orphans that were living in the orphanage of in Krochmana 92. So they were very close. They had a kid. By the way, this child nowadays is an old man and old gentleman, Jarosław Abramow Neverly. So they were very close to each other. So initially, the diary and some of the texts of Korczak that were smuggled out of the ghetto, they ended up in the private apartment of Igor Neverly and his family. And only a moment later, it was moved to the building of another orphanage that was called Nasz Dom, Our Home, Bejtejnu, that was directed by Maryna Falska. And they were very close with Korczak as well, because Nasz Dom, so Our Home and the Home of Orphans, they were acting, I mean, they were like siblings, they were like twins. Korczak was also very active while creating the Polish, so-called Polish institution. So that was a safe place to cover, to hide the bunch of documentation smuggled out from the ghetto. And it was found after the war. Some of the documents were sent to Israel, and they were only found at the end of the 80s, and only then they were published in Polish. Those are the additional texts from the ghetto. And the diary was published already in the 40s or 50s. And for a moment, it was also an obligatory book to be read by the children in the primary school, which was, in my opinion, rather a crazy idea, because it's a very, very difficult text to understand. Is the story about Polish people that suggested to rescue Korczak from deportation is also invented? It's not invented. Some of the proposals were made, and already mentioned Maryna Falska, the director of Bejtejnu, Our Home, Nasz Dom. She was also proposing him to go out from the ghetto, and she was also telling him that she's going to support him, and the apartment is going to be hired for him, and so on and so forth. So he was proposed by different people to leave the ghetto. He was even proposed not to enter the ghetto before the ghetto was finally closed. He was proposed by the mayor of the district that is called Wawer. Nowadays it's a district of Warsaw. It's in one of the parts of the city, but at that time that was a kind of a village next to Warsaw, and Korczak was going there with the children every year, starting in 20s, for some kind of a summer camp, kaitana, something like this. So they were going there to spend summer months, and also they went there in the year of 1940, so right before the Warsaw Ghetto was created. And the mayor of Wawer, the mayor of this area, Stanisław Krupka, proposed Korczak to stay, not to come back to Warsaw, but to stay in Wawer, to stay in Różyczka. That was the name of the camp, Różyczka, Little Rose. But Korczak refused, and we've got the testimony of Stanisław Krupka, where he says that Korczak told him that, no, Mr. Krupka, I have to be with the children. If I promise them to be with them, I'm going to stay with them till the end. You have to be loyal to the people whom you promised, or something like this. So I mean, that was the pre-ghetto proposal, but there were more proposals also made by the colleagues and friends, Polish colleagues and friends, during the time of the Warsaw Ghetto. I want to say, okay, however, the great force is yes, of course, I agree, and thank you, Dalia, for this comment, and I wave to you.
Agnieszka, just tell the audience they don't see the question, so just tell them.
Yes, that the author of the.
Oh, should I say?
I would say that the author of the question is Dalia Offer, whom I know from another context, and whom I hug virtually from Warsaw now.
Yes, but
yes, it was a great force. It was a great force of the legend, of course. I mean, it was useful. It was useful, and it stayed actually in the public remembrance. It stayed in the public remembrance. We remember Korczak not because of his great books, mostly because let's be loyal to ourselves. We don't know those books very well. I mean, we've got a few of them. We don't know the whole legacy, but we remember the legend. The map of the ghetto should list Zamenhof and not Dzika. Yes, that's true. That's true. That was changed in the late 20s, of course. I took this map, the background of the map, from the Gazette licensed by the Germans, I guess, from the Nowy Kurier Warszawski, if I'm not mistaken, but yes. From knowing the respect he gave to children and his commitment to truth, it's likely that he would have colored the march in the cheerful way. I mean, everything is likely. We don't know. We were not the witness, or even the witness could have lied to us. But it's possible that he was trying to calm down the group. He was trying to tell them that whatever happens, they are going to be together, they are going to support each other, and they are going to somehow survive this experience that nowadays we know that it never happened. Okay. Yes. My mother as well told me that as a teenager in Warsaw during the war, she was watching Korczak marching, yes, with the children in the ghetto on their last way. Many people were claiming that they were part of this moment, part of this event, and actually I believe all of them, but sometimes I can tell that some of them just wanted. Like Mary Berg, for example, she saw something, and she actually told us that she saw Korczak, but she could have not known that those were not the children of Korczak, that those were the children from another orphanage. Rescue from, or just deportation. They probably already realized that sending people to the East is not sending them to make them work somewhere, to make their life easier, and so on and so forth. So I would say that they already realized that the whole thing is not going to end up well. As an historian, can you please, I'm not historian, but can you please tell more about the psychological phenomena of people remembering events that they were not present at? it was tempting, and there are some events that people would like to tell us more about, but they had never the chance to be present at that moment. They just wanted to share their personal story while using some kind of general story or more common story that already happened. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a historian as well, I'm rather anthropolog of culture, but I think that there is a kind of, we are all tempted to be a part of big events. We are all tempted to be kind of part of a big history. And there is a testimony of Kalman Shapiro, whose son I had the privilege to know. Whose son was called Jerzy Shapiro. He was a medical doctor. He was a neurosurgeon. And this father, Kalman Shapiro, who was in the Warsaw Ghetto, in the 60s, he wrote a letter to the weekly Polityka. And there he wrote that, yes, he was standing and he was seeing everything from the very beginning till the very end. And he was giving the details also what he saw. And when I was speaking with Dr. Jerzy Shapiro, with Professor actually Jerzy Shapiro, and he told me that he was not present in the ghetto at that time. He just wanted to be a part of the whole story. So, yes. What is the difference between Korczak and Mordechai Anielewicz in the historical place in Polish remembrance? Well, Korczak is associated with the children. Korczak is associated with social help rather. And while speaking about the resistance, he's rather associated with kind of, we call it civil resistance. It's not fighting, it's not, using guns and so on and so forth. He's rather associated with everyday difficult work with the children that he conducted for about 30 years. So that's the main difference. It's not an event like Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It's not a big thing that happened in April and May 1943. It's rather a slow, difficult, dubious work that is conducted every day with the group of people who are rather unprivileged, who are rather cross-excluded as Jews, as children, as orphans, as poor people. On side, the historical data. On other side, the pedagogical inspiration. Yes. What is your most impressive fact of Korczak? The most impressive fact of Korczak for me, I'm fully impressed actually, and it's been already many years that I'm dealing with this topic. But I would say that the most impressive thing for me is the fact that he was 200% human, that he was brave enough, for example, to call Anna Braudeheller in an official letter that he sent to some officials, to some clerks, that he was trying to fight with corruption, that he was trying to fight with some not very well planned actions that were undertaken in the Warsaw Ghetto, that he was brave enough to call her names, like publicly, that he was not ashamed of telling the truth. So that's the thing that impresses me the most, probably, that he was not trying to be delicate in a moment that maybe it would be appreciated, that he was telling the truth directly. Korczak is well known, not just a hero, of course, he was a very special educator, for sure, with special view on children's life. That's true. To be in such a job make him admired, of course. Why you think still there was a need to make him a hero? Heroes are useful, especially in the context, I guess so, in the context of the war, in the context of helping unprivileged. And I mean, we've got more than Korczak, but some of them, they are called, they are named with Korczak names. And there is a very interesting example from Miedzeszyn, from the kind of hospital for the children that were sick, that had tuberculosis. That was also a doctor, medical doctor, called Tola Mintz. And we don't remember her name nowadays. I mean, we do, some of us, we do remember her name, but she's very often called Korczak in a skirt. There is another story from Krakow of David Kurtzman, the leader or the director of one of the Krakow orphanages that were also deported, this time to Auschwitz. And for many years, he was not known under his real name, David Kurtzman, but he was called the Korczak from Krakow. So, I mean, we needed this figure, we needed this label, and maybe it was easier just to have this kind of one symbol that can be associated and used in many contexts. Was the end clear to be to the miss of them all? We don't know, unfortunately. Korczak had a family in Israel. No, his closest family was actually his sister, Anna, 3 years older. We've got, I mean, it's actually incorporated in the text of the diary of Janusz Korczak. There is a letter, the last letter that he wrote to her. And we don't know why, but Henryk Anielewicz also typed it and included it in the whole text of the Korczak's diary. Probably she also died, or she got deported in the Great Liquidation action. Where can I buy his diary? Like in Polish, you can buy it without any problems. It was also published in Hebrew, so hopefully on eBay, if it's not republished, if it was not republished recently, so probably it's available in eBay. And it was also translated into English by Professor Kulawiec, so there is also an English version. There is an interesting story about the Dzielna Street. There were 4 orphanages on the street called Dzielna. The most famous, the most popular, but the most tragic at the same time, was the one located at Dzielna 39. That was the orphanage for the youngest children, for the foundlings. That was the biggest orphanage, also relocated to the Warsaw Ghetto. And that was operating in the worst conditions we can ever imagine. And Korczak also went there for a month to serve as an educator, semi-director, no one knows. He also never knew what's his role in that institution. But that's the first one. The second one is Dzielna 61. And that was the orphanage that was created only in 1942. And that was, it had its special name. It was called the Goodwill Orphanage. There was another one, Dzielna 67, the one for the young children, but not the youngest, the children from 3 to 7. And that was directed, or one of the teachers or educators employed there was Sara Grober-Janowska, who, like Korczak, like many other educators and teachers, decided to stay with the children till the last moment. Moreover, she asked the rest of the staff to promise that they are going to stay with the children till the last moment. So Sara Grober-Janowska should be also remembered. And there's another one orphanage located at the Dzielna Street, Dzielna 15, that was created in the premises of something that at the very beginning was designed to be a soup kitchen, but finally it changed, it evolved into an orphanage, like regular orphanage, providing the children like full help, full support, lodging, food, kind of an education, and like 24 hours, 7. There was a Dzielna in front of Pawiak, yes. What was the part of Stefan running? I mean, they were equals. Of course, he was the director, but she was doing most of the job, most of the difficult things. Of course, Maciuś the King, King Mat the First, and the King Mat on the Deserted Island, and also the book Kajtek the Wizard, and many other books that are beautiful and were read by the pupils, by the students, young students in their young age or in their childhood. How do you refer to Władysław Szlengel poem, A Page from the Action Diary? I love this poem, and but I know that Schlengel wrote it without knowing, without seeing what already happened. He wrote about the legend. I mean, he wrote about what he have heard, from another inhabitants of the Warsaw Ghetto. And the last questions, are there many documents on Tola means? I found a few documents and only one letter of hers. I will be happy to have more. I will check all of my home archive, and I will contact Professor Offer as soon as possible, and I will provide you with the exact answer. So yes. Thank you very much for the questions. I answered 32, there is a list, so thank you very much, and I hope it was helpful also for you and somehow inspiring. Let me hope.
This is the record of questions, I think. So thank you very much. Thank you all for taking part on this second event of the second series. I would like to thank you again, Dr. Agnieszka Witkowska-Krych, and to the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute, especially to Aga Kargol and to the director, Monika Krawczyk, and from the Polish institution to Julia Mackiewicz-Saban and the acting director, Katarzyna Dziejawska, and to Gil Faran from the Association of Israeli Guides and Leaders of Delegations to Poland and Commemoration of the Holocaust, and also to Moreshet, Mordechai Anielewicz Memorial. Thank you all. Keep safe, keep healthy, and hope this COVID issues will leave us as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again for your patience, for all of the questions. As Korczak said, question is more important than the answer. So it was a very, very important part of this event today, the questions that you all asked. Thank you again.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.